Hey everyone, Sarah Barnes-Humphrey here at Four Kites Visibility with Tom and Dustin. Tom, let's start with you. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. My name is Tom Grigorczyk. I'm a Vice President of Industry Strategy at Four Kites, primarily focusing on helping manufacturing companies drive value in supply chain. So excited to be with you today.
Amazing. I'm so excited for you to be here. Now, Dustin, tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. Dustin Burke. I'm a senior partner at Boston Consulting Group. I lead our supply chain practice there. So I work with a team of supply chain consultants, data scientists, data engineers, designers to build digital supply chain solutions for our clients.
Wow, amazing minds all coming together and giving us the data we need in supply chain. So Dustin, you were on stage today. Talk to us a little bit about the key insights, the key messaging that came out of your presentation.
Sure. So what I talked about up there was that currently we see cost pressure coming back, and coming back pretty fast in a couple of sectors. Consumer goods, industrial goods, healthcare, other ones too. But it doesn't mean we can take our eye off the ball in terms of agility and resilience in supply chain. So we see these age-old problems coming back while still having to cope with new challenges.
So many.
But we don't think that the old moves are the right ones.
Right.
So we're often talking about calculations that balance inventory with lead times, and maybe we're talking about closing plants or idling lines or something. We actually talked about a few moves that we think are more nuanced and have better trade-offs.
Okay.
But they do require different capabilities. We think the companies that do those well are the ones that are going to pull away from the pack.
Amazing, and we talk a lot about talent, right? We talk a lot about automation and how jobs are going to be changing, and I think that's what you're talking about when you mention that. Can you give us a little bit more insight into maybe what those roles could be?
Sure, I think that's a good question, because in supply chain, when we say talent, we really mean two different things.
Okay.
We often mean people who can work in or lead operations in a manufacturing site, in a distribution center, in a fleet of vehicles. That is very scarce right now, and we know that. I don't think that's really going to change. Birth rates aren't very high, immigration rates aren't very high. I think that's a permanent shift we're going to experience. And so we need to deal with that reality, but also leading supply chains, understanding digital technologies, while still being able to walk into those environments with a lot of frontline labor and having the credibility to deal with that workforce. So we need leaders who can really do both.
Amazing, thanks for sharing that. Now, from a Four Kites perspective, how important were some of the key messaging that came from the presentation that Dustin and I think Fab did together?
You know, I think one of the main takeaways I took from the overall discussion was being connected. There's a lot of data silos that are still out there, and a lot of times it's because the technology didn't exist, right? So a lot of times people would download stale data to Excel to try and solve that problem of the day. And everyone's trying to do the right thing, but also they're a lot of times incented to do opposite things. So I think one of the things that I took away was getting more connected, and from a talent perspective, making sure that everyone's driving towards the same end goal versus competing key performance indicators.
Absolutely. Now we're talking also about manufacturing, right? So talk to us about how we're balancing resilience, how they're thinking about digital transformation being that key component to their key to success moving forward.
I think one of the things, I speak with a lot of supply chain executives, and I see it from two different angles when you bring up that question. I think the first is making sure that you're delivering excellent customer service, whether it's to another business or to the end customer from a manufacturing perspective. I was speaking to a director of logistics, and he said one of the things that he gets from an overall technology investment is they're no longer arguing with their customers over whether something was on time and in full. They're actually having meaningful conversations to how to grow together and improve the business. And I also think from a manufacturing perspective as well, it's interesting because you make things. And so there's a lot more emphasis to make sure that the inbound raw materials are coming in on time. Otherwise, you have talent just stopped, right? And it's not just the people that are loading and unloading the trucks and the warehousing and all that. It's people on the production lines as well as outbound logistics. So making sure all those are in unison is really crucial.
Well, and I love to hear that we are no longer playing the blame game in logistics and supply chain, because theoretically that was happening before the introduction of technology, before we could actually present the data and say, no, here's what happened. Part of it was our fault, but part of it, we need to look at from your end as well. So Dustin, what's your perspective then on the digital transformation when it comes to manufacturing, cost versus agility, how we're balancing that resilience?
That's a good question. We do still see the blame game sometimes, but we do end it almost as soon as it starts with some facts and data. We try to get all of the functions looking at the same facts and data. And I don't just mean bringing in reports, but real time. And that's truly possible now. It gets us past something that, I think companies still do sometimes, is they talk about growth teams and cost teams, and I have a cost problem and therefore a supply chain problem. We can really look at where costs are introduced, where we're having service challenges, whether that resides with product design decisions, or whether we see that downstream in, say, a distribution center. And so that very much helps. The other thing I think, too, is that COVID was a bad thing, but one of the things we saw for supply chain is supply chain's resilience and agility is a growth driver.
Yeah.
So many companies, not all, but so many companies saw opportunities for growth that they couldn't fully realize because of supply chain.
Yeah.
And once supply chain leaders stepped up, and they did, then that growth expectation was realized. And I think, that is something that many company leaders remember.
So supply chains are really a competitive advantage.
Yes.
So if we think about them as a cost center, we can't also think about them as a competitive advantage, right? And so I think it's really important to be talking about that. But also part of digital transformations is being connected, which is what you said earlier. It's also the theme at the Visibility Conference. And so when we think about connected, what does connected mean to you? How important is this event to supply chain professionals? Tom?
Well, I think this is really important to be connected, and it's not just, we're speaking a lot about just supply chain, and you brought up a great point of not being a cost center, but also working in unison. I think one of the things that we see from this conference is there is the capability to be more connected with the customer service and sales teams and the end customers as well.
Yes.
So they're able to now see where something, before they're expecting something to show up on time and in full, they're now able to have that capability to understand where it is in the process, right? Has it been picked yet? Is it in transit? And when is it expected to arrive on time? So extending that to not just the supply chain area where it was legacy a cost center, it's now being used as more of a customer service type of approach for all downstream supply chain through sales to the end customers.
Yeah, I talk about that all the time. Supply chain needs to be connected to customer service, to marketing, right? If we're going to market a promotion or something like that, we need to include supply chain, right? So what does connected mean to you? How has this event really been for you, Dustin?
Well, we've talked about connected to our customers or to our suppliers, and I think, Sarah, you made a good point about connecting across functions. There's another point, I think, to something, Tom, that you said earlier, which is for manufacturing companies, we have focused really a lot on digital technologies and automation within a manufacturing environment, within a distribution and logistics environment. But now we have an opportunity to connect the two. So if we see a plant experiencing quality problems, for example, we can connect that upstream to the supplier instantaneously. If we see demand increasing downstream, we can actually increase the length of a production run, potentially. If we know that we have a shortage or a delay on a key raw material, we can adjust the production schedule instantaneously, if we do a good job of connecting the teams, but also different sources of data.
Well, and that's really what this event is doing, is bringing us all together to have conversations about how do we become connected? How do we stay connected? What does that look like? What's the data exchange as well, which is important. Now, looking into the future, what advice would you have for supply chain professionals, maybe manufacturers, looking at digital transformation, thinking about balancing resiliency, looking at supply chain being a competitive advantage? Dustin, I'll start with you.
I'm going to reflect on a conversation I had last night where I was talking to several different companies that are here for the conference. And several of them talked about how they've gotten beyond the position of having to resolve supply chain problems via email and spreadsheets.
Yes, so many emails.
Several of them, though, mentioned that they are still using those techniques, but they're trying to focus on exporting data or generating and printing out reports that are supported by these digital supply chain investments.
Okay.
I think if that's what we're doing, then we know we're not fully doing it right.
Right.
We need to learn from our friends and peers and other companies that have gotten out of that habit and see how they made it work. I think that's how you kind of know whether it's working for you or whether you're not there yet.
Well, I think also seeing is believing
Yeah.
sometimes, right? We talk in theory about digital transformation, but sometimes we need to get our hands in there and really see what it can do for us when we fully immerse ourselves into it. And we really can't be 1 foot in, 1 foot out, right, when it comes to technology. So what would be your advice, Tom?
I'd say to go along with that, I think really making sure that the talent that you have is trained, and also to break down the actual silos. You know, make sure that people aren't working with competitive KPIs, right? They're working more as one team because the data is connected. And the other thing too is being more real time, and the technology is there to make that happen. You know, we still hear a lot of downloading data to Excel. But once something is more real time and you set those guardrail thresholds throughout your entire network, you're able to work off of an exception basis. And I think that's where you have to begin to trust the systems out there in order to develop that productivity amongst your team and to become much more agile as a result of that.
Yeah, being more proactive rather than reactive, which I think we were a little bit, pre-pandemic. Well, Tom and Dustin, thank you so much for joining me at the Visibility Conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.